Hi, I want to thank everyone for joining today. My name is John Gallagher. I'm Vice President of Viaku Labs here at Viaku. And, the reason we're all coming together today, I don't need to give, I think, any intro to the Claude MYthos Preview announcement that came out a couple weeks ago. And I think all of us in the security domain, whether it's cybersecurity, physical security, OT, IoT security, it is a game changer. And so I've brought together two people who I think are real experts at both the intersection of physical security and cybersecurity, and people whose history and track record is that they've been ahead of the curve on new technologies that have come into security and how people should be viewing them and addressing them. So let me just do a quick intro. Josh Chin, who's the co-founder and managing director at NetForce, and Maria Sumnick. She's with the DHS, head of the DHS task force on critical infrastructure, and formerly with New York City Cyber Command. So both bring a good expert perspective to things. So Josh and Maria, if you're okay with it, I'm just going to give a couple of intro slides and let the dialogue flow from there. All good?
All good.
Super. So yeah, let me just start with kind of a high level here. Whoops. Let's start with the high level on MYthos. Um, I call it the inversion because it changes a lot of things that people have woven into their practices around security, and especially OT security, right? It does a few things. One is that remediation becomes the priority. When you're in a category as MYthos brings, where vulnerability detection is trivialized, it becomes out of the box. Then everything shifts to how are you addressing it? How are you remediating it? So remediation immediately becomes inverted. It becomes the priority, not the threat detection or finding the vulnerabilities. Another thing is OT dramatically becomes the attack surface. Um, and I'll show a couple other slides that highlight how this has been a trend regardless of MYthos. MYthos just accelerates it. The other thing is that it brings to many organizations the need to become truly cross-functional, right? MYthos is not a cyber threat to data centers. It is in part, of course, but it is to the organization as a whole. And that's where it really takes some cross-functional efforts in ensuring that whether it's IT, OT, IoT, cyber physical systems, industrial control systems, ICS, all of these are attack surfaces and have to have approaches developed or implemented to protect them. And the threats that we're going to talk about today are really the reason that OT is at the forefront. To me, it's simply one major change with MYthos. It's that it's operating system agnostic, right? In the IT world, you've got a handful of common operating systems that are used for devices and systems. You come to the operational technology side of things, there's over 150,000 of them. And MYthos being agnostic as to the underlying operating system really does change the game when it comes to that. It also develops an approach which I think of as details at scale. There's a case just just the last couple of days. Pocket OS had its production database completely obliterated and had to scramble to recover customer data across a number of months. And it's because they were letting an AI agent operate with full human authority across its production database. And it
Yep.
found API keys and certain hidden elements that a typical human operator wouldn't actually have come across. And that enabled it to do its thing. So the details at scale that an AI entity, an agent, can handle is another aspect of the real threat here. This also exposes every organization's accumulated security debt. Another reason that you have the desire for automation or requirement for automation being brought by MYthos. And finally, it exposes a lack of governance across the broad organization, whether it's not having the proper governance for OT or for AI being used or for a variety of things. So this is a real shakeup in that respect. Last thing I'll just highlight is that this is part of a shift that we've been seeing coming over time, right? The IoT, OT devices today represent a much larger attack surface just based on network connections. So what can be reached by a vulnerability is predominantly now over on the OT and IoT side. And I'd like to highlight, right, with Project MYthos, or with MYthos, came along Project Glasswing, which was an attempt to give defenders, the cyber defenders, the early access to MYthos in order to develop defenses and implement them ahead of general public availability. None of the 50 companies involved with Project Glasswing are OT or IoT or ICS oriented companies. So I think that also puts the onus onto organizations to themselves ensure that they have the right automation at scale to address the vulnerability remediation that MYthos is going to bring specifically to their OT and IoT estates. And again, this is trend data prior to MYthos, right? We've seen the growth of OT attacks over time and the projection for it. MYthos, if anything, is just going to accelerate this trend and actually make the curve much, much steeper. And the last thing I'll finish with is that the consequence of this is not just, as it would be in the IT world, data theft or data issues. It's physical, right? These are cyber physical systems that have issues with respect to once breached or once exploited, they cause physical consequences in the real world. Things like water treatment plants having their chemical balances changed, having the ability for an attacker to open all the doors of an organization because they've successfully exploited the access control system. So things of that nature, again, I think MYthos is going to really bring to the forefront very quickly, and again brings the point to all of us of we really need to have effective methods of automation to address this, and also effective ways to bring together other parts of the organization, whether it's through governance or whether it's through other methods. So anyway, that's the tee up, folks. I think let me just turn it over to Josh and Maria. Did I miss anything that you guys see as critical to how MYthos affects security teams, or things that I'm missing in terms of the potential issues that come with it?
Well, I'll kick it off. Well, first of all, I work for the Task Force on National and Homeland Security, which we're a consulting and nonprofit organization that works with the government on policy and other facets of hardening our grid or our critical infrastructure. So I just want to put that out there so people don't think I report into the DHS and all that. But so it's really interesting because I've considered, and this, John, artificial intelligence of any type, especially now MYthos, as a double-edged sword. And what I mean, it can be for good and it can be used for bad once it's on your system. And I know you've seen the presentation I've done on before you place AI on your network, you should do proper segmentation from the level 1, all the way up the chain level to level 7, exactly how and where you want AI deployed and what kind of outcomes you expect from that. But the incident you just mentioned is a classic example of unleashing a technology on your network where you haven't set the proper policies, nor procedures, nor standards, nor governance. And we're in a position right now where technology is moving so much faster than we can govern. And that's where I see the biggest gap right now. And that can lead to MYthos, autonomously discovering and weaponizing zero-day vulnerabilities. if you're not quite sure how you've deployed it, you just can't assume that you can just deploy this and all will be good and you can sleep at night. That's really not how it's going to work. And I'll at this point I'll kick it off to Josh.
I think at the end of the day, the question isn't whether you would use Mythos or AI in your business. I
Yeah.
think the question is who's going to use Mythos and AI, whether
Mm.
you're going to be the first one to do it or an adversary is going to be the first person to use
Yeah.
it, whether it be your products, whether it gets your company, intellectual property. I think that's the very big question at the end of the day. Will you manage the risks up front, or will you find out on the opposite side? Uh, the use of AI, like Maria has been so gracious to point out, it is a double-edged sword. It is very much like a hammer. You can use it to bang nails to build a house, or you can use it to break a window and take things from a car. So I look at it as a very much AI or Mythos as a tool. Just the question is who's going to wield it.
Right.
But let me just say, why uh, are we upset about Mythos and we haven't been upset about other attempts? And I'm going to put out there, it's that we have reached a point with AI in general where the pressures from above, and I'll point, I don't know where, right? But, boards of directors, upper management, funders, the venture capital community, everyone is requiring that AI be used to effectively cut headcount and speed time to market. And that is a recipe to break things. And to do it through AI means to do it at scale and do it with potentially very, very severe consequences. So, yeah, it's a tool like everything else. It has positives and negatives like everything else.
Mhm.
But I think the way that it's being pitched and used within organizations today, again, I'm going to come back to the case with Pocket OS and Cursor. Um, they gave responsibility for their production database to an AI agent. Let that sink in. We're in the early innings, and yet an organization felt that that was the right answer. I don't know. I feel like Mythos is going to bring cases like that in abundance within a few months. And uh, is it lack of governance or is it something else?
It's
Yeah.
probably not just governance. Oh, go ahead, Maria.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
It's not just a bunch of governance. I mean, let's just be honest.
Yeah.
Um, Buzzwords drive conversations, whether in the boardroom or on the
Yeah.
or in with investors. I mean, think about it when blockchain first came out. Someone made an absurd amount of money on making a blockchain toaster. Uh, it's not really something that we should really be jumping and leaping towards. I'm going to be the first person to say, when adopting any technology, you should at least look before you leap. I'm not saying stop and be analysis paralysis. I'm saying you should at least look and think about the risks to your business, the impact to it. um you know I think the Apple approach and sometimes is a good approach too. You don't have to be the first to market, but you have to
Hmm.
be the first to master it to a point where no one else has mastered it, and it's such an art and a science that you bring to it that no one can actually touch you.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And one what I call a deterministic control, or the breakdown thereof, is, you mentioned that there's a push by shareholders, by even our government administration, that we have to be, a certain other nation state in AI, and so what's happening is that there's this push for this technology, and without understanding, and the premise is that OT environments, and this is what they don't understand, okay, and neither do they know, and no one has talked to them about this, but OT environments rely on predictable, meaning if X, then Y logic, right? And AI introduces what we call probabilistic reasoning, which can lead to unpredictable sort of hallucinations or drift, where the system executes unsafe physical commands in edges in cases where it wasn't trained for. And this is the part that really no one addresses, but is very real in deploying AI on operational technology networks. They think that it's the same as IT, and it's not. They're two very different environments, as I just pointed out. It's very predictable. It's if in logic wise, if you've done any programming, you know, like I said, if X then Y logic. If Y then it does another deterministic type of, we got to Y, and Y, if Y then X, you know, it gives you another set of probabilities. But
No.
it doesn't, it's deploying OT, deploying AI MYthos or whatever on an OT environment really needs a set of subject matter experts doing it that understand that environment. And I'll toss it back to Josh.
Yeah.
I think you bring up a wonderful point, though. You know, you need that subject matter expertise or domain expertise, but at the same time, we also understand that, you know, because of cloud computing, because of access, these AI agents are able to, not AI agent, AIs are able to go access the internet. It's potential to assimilate information is possible in real time to a point where, you know, it's gathering enough information and knows the common denominators. It can reasonably infer that, hey, I'm saying this, it means Y. And, you know, going back to John's question, like, you know, why Mythos? Why has it gained, you know, so much traction? I would honestly argue um, we're building upon evolution of anything, you know, previously. Everything that we've done in technology has never been linear. It's always been exponential in growth.
Mhm.
And because of the exponential nature of growth and anything we do, you know, everything is built upon something previously. Like, you know, we wouldn't have cloud computing unless we had, you know, access to amazing storage, internet, and bandwidth. And we wouldn't have that because we didn't have access to the shrinking of the computing, you know, reducing lithographic size. All
Yeah.
of this is coming together and coming ahead to a point, you know, where we're hitting a sort of critical mass where we're just seeing evolutions in any technology growing exponentially. And when you think about it, you know, I know this is on OT, but think about the idea and concept of the microprocessor, where the lithograph, the lines that make up the circuitry of a modern processor these days, we're approaching to a point where the diameter the lithograph is literally less than the diameter of a human DNA strand, less than 2 nanometers. That is amazing to think about. And when you think about, you know, artificial intelligence and the exponential nature, it doesn't surprise me that we're hitting this point. People are going like up in arms about it, you know, like it's the end of the world. For me, I look at it as a wonderful opportunity because going back to our hammer analogy, what is used to discover vulnerabilities could also now be potentially a way to accelerate um, remediations, finding solutions, concepts, ideas, potentially compensating controls. There has to be something in there that it could probably enumerate. Yes, you know, we have as human beings shouldn't treat it as the gospel, but we should actually, you know, take it under some advisement and think about, you know, is this a viable solution in our business? And it does not remove the human factor from it. Like, you know, if we tell it garbage, it's going to give us a garbage outcome, and
Exactly.
it's going to impact the business.
And 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 Josh, I'm just going to challenge you a little bit on that, because I think you're bringing up one of the most fundamental points about, you know, the situation we're in with AI and threats. It's that, following your lithography example, right? I grew up in the chip business. I'm very proud of having been part of a team that created the first billion transistor chip, et cetera, right? And all of that is simply because you've had decades of learning that have accumulated and led to, and there were some false starts and path course correction that had to be followed in the industry to get us to where we are. we're in such an early phase of AI, right? And one discussion that I hear more and more, and it worries me deeply when it comes to OT, it's that AI has no physical awareness and physical perception, right? That the call it the data base for the world that we exist in is very rudimentary for an AI agent. And so its conception of the physical world is vastly different than what the real physical world is. And in the same way, right, its ability to, I'll just say, compensate, for its lack of knowledge has led to things like hallucinations and citations being created in its output that don't exist in the real world, right? So we're in such an early phase that I can't imagine trusting the data that's feeding AI to make OT and ICS decisions properly. It's just, it doesn't have the right basis. It's been trained on data and text. Anyway, I don't know. I mean, maybe I'm overdoing the doom and gloom, but I think the AI decision making when it
Hmm.
comes to this domain is not worth trusting at this point.
So I'm going to bring myself way back to the 80s. And I worked on a machine. I think I mentioned this to you one time, John, called the connection machine.
Oh yeah, we have. I worked, sorry, with thinking machines up in Cambridge,
Yeah,
Mass
it was
myself back
it was
then.
a thinking logical. It was probably AI 1.0, and this was 1988.
Hmm.
And so it's been around for a while. And to say that it's still rudimentary, I don't agree with that. I actually think it's more borderline sentient than anything else, if it's not already. And because what we're seeing now is really not the technology that is really available. They can't just throw this all out at us. That's why we're seeing such this. Like I said, let's think about that. I mean, this stuff has existed for almost 40 years already, and now is when we're starting to see it. I think because humanity's at a point where we can start digesting this. Everyone knows about the internet. Technology now is part of our everyday life.
Mm.
But um, again, going back to Josh's analogy of a hammer, it can be used for good, or can it be used for, lack of a better word, evil.
Mm.
So, how are we gonna it really goes back to who you are hiring, or the room full of subject matter experts. When a CEO decides that we need to implement AI, is having the right people in place that can take what the vision of the CEO is trying to get to his products to market, or even looking at the government, trying to keep up with another nation state that is moving rapidly with AI. Yeah, having advisors around them that can better guide them to, you know, decisions that won't compromise. Okay, because there's going to be give and take no matter what
Mm.
implementing AI. And so how do you sit down and do a reference architecture? You got to really think these things out. And I know it's moving
Yeah.
so fast that you don't have time to do that. And there lies problem number one, right? So, Josh, how do what's you're more in it than I am. I'm more on the policy side now as opposed to the implementation. But, how do you deal with that whole dynamic of, how do we get the reins back on the horse?
I think it's a multi-pronged approach. I think, from a public policy side, we need to look at embracing it, dumping more money into education, because even though I think investors and CEOs and the C-suite is thinking, oh, it's going to save me a lot of money, in the long run, I don't think that's actually necessarily true. When we look at history, anytime we've had a major evolution in technology, even though certain jobs have gone away. Take for example, in our early, I know it's our 250th anniversary as a nation, but think about it. In our 250 years, we went from stagecoaches to the Pony Express to the telegraph to the telephone to the internet. All of these mass forms of communication did eliminate jobs, but at the same time, it created a whole host of new jobs in that process too. I think the same thing is going to happen here. We're going to have people who have to be experts in something, because at the end of the day, when we're getting these machine learning models, these AI models up to date to whatever we're expecting, we still have to be experts. We still need to know. And I think the jobs explosion that we're going to be seeing is not going to be in the generalist space. It's going to be in the specialist space, in your domain or your expertise. And I think if we want to really embrace artificial intelligence to an exponential standpoint, I think from a public policy standpoint, we need to dump as much money into education as possible, because we need to be able to fact check and ensure that we're thinking about the risks in education, in artificial intelligence and the outputs coming in, because we need to be able to check this in real time.
Right.
And I think it's going to be one of those cases where, if you don't make that kind of investment into people, into the processes, that technology is going to completely overwhelm those two, and it's going to self-destruct a business.
Yeah.
And underlying what both of you are saying, I think, is the idea that humans are still in control. Humans are the decision makers. Humans are not out of the loop. Is that a fair statement? Because Josh, I think the skill set that you're talking about directly goes to human approval, right? You can't have human approval without some degree of specialized knowledge. Am
Right.
I
I on
think
base or off base there?
I still strongly believe, like, as we keep coming back to this hammer analogy here. It's very much how you wield the tool. You know, it, yes,
Yeah.
you can use a hammer to break a window, but why are you breaking the window? Are you breaking the window for the sole purposes of robbing someone, or to test the ability and the resilience of that glass, and to see if it will withstand an impact of a hammer? I mean, there's no one way or the other to say if it's good or evil. And me being as a technologist, someone who's grown up in technology, I've always looked at as a technology as a means to better humanity. It is always a way to actually improve what we have.
Mhm.
But at the same time, it's still beholden upon us to make sure that we're wielding any technology, especially artificial intelligence, as a means to help humanity and not to harm humanity. It means that we have to write very strong ethics and morals into anything that we're doing, so we're not going out of line and harming one another. We have a choice here, honestly. It's not even just good or evil. Is, do we want to love humanity, or do you want to hate on humanity?
Right.
Love humanity.
And that's the thing, how do we use this for good, right? It's the tools. I mean,
Yeah, but
Josh
it's
has
not.
grown up
But it's
with
not.
technology. I've grown up through technology. I mean, I'm the generation that used to go outside and ride their bikes, play kick the can, all the neighbors, we'd stay out there till late, to then, going to college and coming out of college and having, the grace of being hired uh, by NASA to see really one of the first generations of supercomputing centers, in the world. And it still is, where I worked at Ames Research Center, Palladius is still one of the top computing centers there. But so my view on technology is exactly that. What I believe AI is absolutely needed. I think moving forward, it needs to be integrated intelligently and prudently into every aspect of our what I call sector environments, because the manufacturing, food processing, uh, energy generation, etc. But how do we do this so we don't introduce more problems than we're actually addressing.
Oh,
That's
yeah.
the issue. That's really,
Oh,
in a nutshell.
and let me come at that head on, which is, I'm going to cherry pick some of your words. The word integrate stands out to me, right? People talk about AI in isolation, and that's absolutely the wrong way to view it. I mean, my honest view is that we are heading into a new technology domain. I think Josh is right saying, hey, from smoke signals to stagecoach to
Right.
telegraph to radio to I mean, we've had an evolution of communication technologies. We've had evolutions of other technologies, and they've always had an integration aspect to them of needing other complementary technologies.
Right.
My deep concern is that I do coming back to how we started the discussion here. Uh, this brings remediation to the forefront.
Yep.
And so if you're going to use AI in your organization and you're not investing right now in automating vulnerability remediation, you're headed towards disaster because you are not integrating the right structure to accept the benefits of the new technology, all the goodness, right? Because again, I'm with Josh, right? I mean, I've seen it. I think we all have, right? I mean, that across our lives, technology has improved things broadly, but there are aspects that lack of integration, lack of structure, lack of governance, lack of automated remediation technology at scale is going to deprive people of all those benefits. In fact, turn it from a net positive to a net negative. So without that integration phase, which I think we're recklessly whizzing past right now, that's where I'm most concerned.
Yeah.
I think there's something to think about is, when you're looking at all these artificial intelligence initiatives like Glasswing, you know, are you asking, as a human being, to these manufacturers of artificial intelligence is, hey, you know, we design X in OT, we design Y in IT, we design Z, whatever, you know, we account for X in this marketplace and we have this type of impact. We'd like to get in there and use this. And I'm of the opinion, and I'm not representing any AI firm or anything like that. I'm going to be probably unintentionally obligating them in this case. But I think reasonably there is a degree of self-preservation involved that I think they would be willing to expand that special group of 50 to more, because it may be a case that they want to include someone, but they don't know who to talk to. But if we stay in that zone in our lane and not engage with the other side and say, hey, I need access to this, I need to improve stuff, I don't think we're going to get to that point of actually getting to 100 companies or 200 companies, or how many companies that need to use Glasswing before MYthos, comes out and becomes available for public consumption. And I think about just the number of systems that we use for OT, and depending how you want to classify IT or OT systems, um, whether it be for sewage, water, electricity, or life support systems. Every manufacturer of these devices should be asking, hey, how do we get engaged? How do we get involved? Start banging on doors, messaging people on LinkedIn, say, hey, I'm representing X company. I need to get in this program because
Mhm.
we need to protect people on this. And I think any reasonable, and emphasis is the word is reasonable, any
Yeah.
reasonable company who's doing artificial intelligence is going to let you in because they have a self-preservation interest, because ultimately you might end up on one of their machines one day.
Yeah.
No, it's a good point. And actually, we've seen in, I'll say in the OT side of things, some call it AI native organizations who come in with the perspective that you're talking about. Good example in the life safety area is AI fire detection, which to me is a remarkable technology in terms of its ability to catch things in environments like warehouses or outdoor settings and so forth, where it's very difficult, right? Is it fog? Is it smoke? Is it whatever, right? And those AI companies I've seen, again, I'm going to call them AI native, are actually reaching out to companies like ours to work together to make sure that the data integrity of what they're working on is there, right? They get it. They get the fact that if garbage in, garbage out, or if their agent is not being given the right perspective or context on the problem, it's going to get it wrong. And that's why, again, I feel like we're in this integration phase where more organizations should be working together to make sure that the quality of the output is sufficient for use. Um, Maybe in some cases, like the example I gave, that's happening, but the old school OT side, I think bringing them into MYthos, I mean, if they had added a Schneider Electric or similar onto that list, I would have squelched a lot of my negative commentary, since I didn't see them on there, because they could contribute to that context and deliver a better quality output. But
I think that brings up a great point though, and is, why aren't they there? Is it because they don't know who to talk to? Or is it because they've not adjusted the risk calculations and reoriented their security programs to account for the fact that the acceleration of discovering vulnerabilities and the ability to combine vulnerabilities into a massive vulnerability? There's a lot of questions that we can ask, but we obviously don't have answers to. But I think it's a question that we should be asking all ourselves here. Are we factoring in the risks that AI brings into the business? Are we factoring in its impact to the business? And I think a lot of people are not thinking about that. They're thinking it from a very traditional, Web 2.0 perspective instead of an AI oriented accelerant perspective. The way I would analogize it, and John, you and I being here in California, our fire season is basically January through January now. But think about when you have an accelerant like the Santa Ana winds or petroleum or gasoline, all of these conditions could suddenly turn a cinder or a spark into a roaring firestorm with nonstop destruction in a matter of minutes, depending on it. And I think that's the same way we need to think about when it comes to artificial intelligence. The tool, the Gemini, Anthropic, Claude, Meta's platform, any of these major platforms from ChatGPT is a spark. It's an idea that has come to life. Now the question is, what's going to happen? Is people going to pour gasoline and then suddenly poof,
Right.
explodes into a roaring fire? Or, and then what happens to that fire? If we don't master that fire, it's going to, destroy things. But at the same time, we know from understanding fire, it is also such an amazing piece of technology in itself, something that gives us warmth, something that helps us cook food, something as a defensive measure. All of these things, there's also a lot of good in even fire.
There, John, there's also what I've identified over the years is a cultural gap between IT, okay, and the CISOs, the CIOs, the IT side of the house, and the OT / control system side, right? One side is more focused on data, right? The IT side, right? And the operational technology side / control system side is the pure engineering side. And what's happening is that IT is coming to the engineering side and saying, we're going to deploy, we're going to do this, we're going to do. They actually don't really understand that environment completely.
That's right.
If at all, and actually Joe Weiss and Daryl Eltz, who Joe Weiss is probably the world's #1 cybersecurity expert on control system cyber. And Daryl Eltz is the CIO for the state of Louisiana's water systems. They're writing a white paper on this cultural gap. And unless that's addressed and where these two organizations can come together and start really working together. They don't right now. Engineers complain that the IT guys want to do XYZ and they don't understand us. And then the IT side is equally as frustrated, saying, well, we need to do this to better secure this. And they're saying, well, that's not going to work over in our environment. They don't understand. There's this cultural gap, a technology gap too, of the two that need to come together. And you know, I have access to that white paper that through this podcast. If anyone wants to reach out, I'd be glad to forward that to them so you can better understand. AI will not be successfully deployed into the OT environment / even IoT, really, or IIoT, right? Until that gap is addressed. So that's another big major, sort of hurdle that isn't being really looked at.
I'm gonna go back to kind of where we started, and as a form of maybe even starting to wrap up. So while I put these down as just kind of random starting points of discussion, I think we've actually covered almost all of these, especially the cross-functional becomes a requirement, right? I think that's what you're getting at, Maria, is that you can't, and I deep believer, right? We work with OT security teams in a broad range of disciplines, and their domain knowledge is critical to making not just those systems work, but to securing those systems.
Right.
And again, I'm believing that we're a distance away from having that knowledge incorporated into AI to the extent that it could act as a replacement, if ever, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, Josh, I think you spoke quite well on how that specialized human knowledge is likely to become more of value as time goes on with AI as opposed to less, and it's because of that. So yeah, I feel like, in the sense of wrapping up or summarizing some things, I'll point back to these beginning points. I think I'm coming away from this discussion believing that remediation does become a priority because it is the defense that will protect the organization from the disasters that could potentially happen. OT is where the action is going to head to with AI, right? Just even again, network connections, the number of devices deployed, all of those factors, and then AI coming in and being OS agnostic. I think that changes things. So let me just stop the share here. We did get a question. I'd like to pose it and see if we can come out. And I'd like to encourage anyone else to ask any questions. And if not, as Maria offered, I think all of us are open to any questions or dialogue. We're all reachable through LinkedIn. And so, again, feel free to add any other questions to the dialogue here. But the question we got was, can you provide a specific example as to how AI solutions like MYthos pose a specific threat to operations? For example, in manufacturing, pharmaceutical production, or the grid. And yeah, I'll start. Right? And only because it's the anecdote du jour, right? I'm going to point back again to the Pocket OS cursor situation, right? They meaning the agent was successful in deleting the production capability of that company, right? Wiping them out because it found hidden details. Nobody thought that API key that was used only in these rare situations by a human operator would ever be disclosed or exposed. Well, guess what? AI can do that immediately at scale. And so, no, we are in a position right now. Another example, I just love Claude in its Anthropic, I should say, the company that makes Claude and its variants. Anthropic in its break room put in a vending machine. And of course, you'd naturally do what they did, which is you'd put an agent in charge of running it as a business and give that agent sub-agents to operate various parts, the marketing, the procurement, and so forth. And there was human agents available to do things like stocking. Well, apparently they had to pull the plug on it within a week because it just went crazy. It got into a loop of saying, oh, everybody loves PS5s, and it had the machine mostly stocked with PS5s. And then it said, oh, nobody's buying these. We better get rid of the inventory. So they were selling them for like a penny a piece. Anyway, it was just erratic and not real world in its judgments. So I think that's where the OT dilemma, again, coming back to the question, is there a specific example? I think we're starting to see multiple examples of how AI will pick up things and run with them that no human ever would have thought was part of handling a situation. And that's where the danger is. We're going to find a tremendous instability in how it takes action. So again, human in the loop always is the only defense I can think of. And again, coming back to autonomous remediation to match the AI-driven threat speed and scale. You've got to have mechanisms to contain the blast radius. Anyway, any comments on the question that we got, or any manufacturing or other domains that you think are more susceptible to disaster than others?
I don't think it's a matter of just something's more susceptible to others. I think, number one, we're human. We're going to make mistakes. That is a fallacy that is built into us, since the dawn of time. So when we accept that, then the question is, how bad do we make it, and how bad do we allow it? I'm mulling through this question, and I keep coming back to the idea of Stuxnet. When the U.S. and Israel attacked the Iranian nuclear program, which was OT systems, ICS systems, SCADA systems. These were all OT systems that, yes, while air gapped, was still vulnerable, and it was able to cause a great deal of destruction on the nuclear program. When you think about that and think about the amount of R&D that was poured into finding a way to confuzzle and wreak havoc onto these SCADA systems, imagine that being exponentialized by something through artificial intelligence. I don't care which model, just something like that. And thinking about how it could be weaponized in that sense, think about all the manufacturing pharmaceutical productions. They are controlled by OT systems at the end of the day. So that means if we can use AI to accelerate the research and development of these vulnerabilities, you are disrupting everything fundamentally operationally at this point. There's this really cool diagram from the Zero-Day Clock by Sergey Epp, talking about the time to vulnerability to exploitation. When you look at it from 2020, it was approximately 1.3 years was the mean time to exploit. When you got to 2023, it dropped to 4.9 months. And then you're looking right now, the average in 2026, it is 20 hours right now.
I just saw a new data point. By the way, I have this as a backup slide, Josh. So we're on the same page. The time to exploit is one of the scariest aspects to this. And I saw the number 6 hours recently.
Yeah.
So every time I see a new number for this, it's shockingly lower than the previous one.
Yeah.
That's a huge issue of concern. And again, it comes back to if you have AI-driven exploitation and vulnerability discovery, and the time to exploit is shrinking, you can't ignore the need for either an autonomous or an automated at-scale approach to mitigating and remediating those threats.
But I love like what happened at DEF CON last year, where they did the AI challenge, where they had AI going through various major core libraries and looking for both synthetic and actual risks, and it found stuff. And not only was it able to identify vulnerabilities, it was also able to produce a suggested remediation, a suggested patch for it too as well. And so, I think, the doom and gloom and scariness of AI, yes, I think we need to acknowledge, the elephant in the room that it does exist. But I think at the same time, we also have to understand it's how we use it. We can use it to also accelerate our ability to fix things. Yes, we need to go through the QA process. Yes, we need to test it. All these are part of the maturity processes, but we should be using this as a way to, not just break things, but to also fix things as well.
Yeah. I'd like to address a couple of things. First, I know humans, we can make mistakes, but so can AI. And I've actually caught it. More than one occasion, put it that, like a lot of occasions. And again, as Josh was saying, some sort of systems of checks and balances on both sides, on the human side and on the AI side. So, while a lot of the rhetoric is, oh, AI is perfect. No, it's not. It really isn't. And that's why when you do searches, it says at the bottom in very small print all the time, it says AI can sometimes make mistakes, right? You should double check. Okay. Same thing. Humans can make mistakes. You should double check. So that sort of needs to get out there too. And people shouldn't have this false sense of perfection about AI. And it's not. And also point number 2 for me, in the operational technology / control system environment, the main concern for me is data poisoning, and what I call autonomous agents. So what AI can inject false data into sensors to cause operational sabotage, okay, triggering false shutdowns or opening up valves or causing a sensor not to trigger at all. And I'm going to use, so one of the big problems right now is that a lot of operational technology failures are actually not being categorized as cyber attacks when they should be. And I'm going to use one that I questioned, and unfortunately, no one ever did an investigation on. Remember that flooding that happened in Texas that wiped out that
Oh my
camp?
goodness.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know for a fact that upstream, all dams, et cetera, and any place that holds a large amount of water and releases water has sensors, uh, flood sensors, all the way down. And not only do they have flood sensors, they have, in the water overflow gates, everything. There's sensors everywhere. All right. Also, there is what's called a audible system that actually, when a flood stage is sensed or detected by any of those sensors, there are warning sirens that go off in specific intervals, like one long sound, just like the sirens for tornadoes, right? They go off, and to tell people that they're either releasing water to clear out, and they like do a countdown. Well, in that case, none of those sensors worked. Why? No one was given any notice that this large amount of water was being released. And, so there lies an investigation as to, could this have been a control system cyber incident? And there's a lot of them. I would say also the Francis Scott Key Bridge was probably along those lines as well. But there's not enough investigations, forensic cyber investigations being done by true subject matter experts to identify these control system cyber events. So they basically go and are swept under the rug as, some sort of system failure, when I personally believe that they're not. And I actually attend with other subject matter experts, and we discuss what the probability of this incident that was sort of brushed under the, as it was, what are all the signs that point to it as being a control system cyber event? So I think that to me is, because when I talk about sensor, I'm also talking about switches, like railway switches that will control one train being stopped on a side track while another train goes by. It's as easy as compromising that switch and causing a train collision, right? And we know that all these sensors are actually very vulnerable. So to me, that there are probably way more incidents that are attributed to OT/control system cyber than we can even imagine. Because, like I said, the training, and this goes back to what Josh says, is the children that are growing up now are growing up with AI. They're growing up with all this technology. Let's get into the high schools and junior high schools and start giving or setting up programs to help better educate and draw these kids into this technology, because that's what we need. That's absolutely what we need. So
No, I
And
think all three of us share that mission, and I'm going to do a tip of the hat to both of you, Maria. I heard you speak at University of Nevada, their cyber conference last year, and really, I think helping people who are in their education phase do that, and we're working together as well on some high school projects. And Josh, you've been a rock star in terms of the efforts you've done at the college level to help educate and really raise the awareness of people. I think it's critical, right? Even at Viaku, we established last year the Cyber Defense Leadership Scholarship at University of Nevada. We've got other efforts going on as well on trying to encourage students, whether high school or college, to expand their focus of cyber to OT and IoT and ICS, because too much of it, in our view, is driven to IT. But yeah, sorry, Josh.
And I would say also, don't just look at AI and be AI centric.
right.
Like, I think it's a very much, one has to think understanding risk management. One still has to be a huge expert in whatever domain you might be going at. I don't care if it's law. I don't care if it's medicine. I don't care if it's biology. I don't care if it's physics. I don't care if it's engineering. All of these disciplines need fantastic experts. You need to be just as good, if not better, than what these AI models are. And I think, to sum it up, you either master AI or AI masters you.
Absolutely.
Absolutely, we're in a race. So I think we're at the top of the hour. I'm gonna just call the wrap up here. I obviously want to encourage anyone who has remaining questions. Please feel free to reach out to us individually, LinkedIn, or through our respective emails. And with that, I just want to thank both Josh and Maria for a great dialogue and shedding some light on something that I think is not going away anytime soon. I think we're going to hear a lot more in the next few months, and I hope this content we've put together helps to help people shape their views as we go through those next few months.
Yep.
Any other comments, Josh or Maria?
No, thank you, John, for inviting us to share our views on. It's a great webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And thank you to
Yeah,
everyone who came today. We look forward to holding a round two sometime in the future.
great. Hope everyone has a great rest of day. Thanks again.
Take care. Bye.
Cheers.